Well, good morning, good new day. What a grateful heart I have to be here with you this morning. Grateful that, very humbled and honored that John would ask me to come and share a little bit with you this morning. My name's Tim Mavergeorge, and I am a Christian counselor here in town. Brought my wife with me this morning, and we are just honored to be here. We have, I've been practicing Christian counselor for pushing 40 years now. Been married about the same length of time, 39 years. We have 4 children, and been over here several times on Sunday mornings speaking at the summer series, and that's been a real honor. This morning I want to speak, when I talked to John about what to speak on, and knowing that this is a new day. There's a transition at this church, and there's a lot of young couples, and but what I'm going to speak on is largely a parenting message, but it's also, it's some elements that are very much in the middle of every relationship you have. And the title is The Blessing, much like the song that was here. And how about the worship band you guys have? That's amazing. I mean, wow. How beautiful. Sitting there weeping up several times this morning just listening to it. Just amazing. So, you know, and the nature of parenting, we think, you know, when we were in the middle of parenting, we really thought that, you know, surely there are specific things that you can do to make all this work. We have 4 children. The oldest turned 30 this week. We have a senior at Baylor, so kind of in that gap of time there. And we used to be so very worried about it. I used to, and from a biblical standpoint, I was like, what is it that Scripture does say about this? But sometimes, you know, children will throw you a curveball, like this letter I saw. Dear Mom, it's called the Dear Mom letter. And a mother passing by her daughter's room was astonished to see the bed was nicely made and everything was picked up. Then she saw an envelope propped up prominently on the center of the bed. It was addressed Mom. With the worst premonition, she opened the envelope and read the letter with trembling hands. Dear Mom, it's with great regret and sorrow that I'm writing you. I had to elope with my new boyfriend because I wanted to avoid a scene with you and Dad. I've been finding real passion with John. He's so nice, and even with all his piercings and tattoos and his beard and his motorcycle clothes, he's wonderful. But it's not just a passion, Mom. I'm pregnant. And John said that we'll be very happy. He already owns a trailer in the woods and has a stack of firewood for the winter. He wants to have many more children with me, and that's now one of my dreams too, Mom. John taught me that marijuana doesn't really hurt anyone, and we'll be growing it for us and trading it with his friends for all the other things that we want. In the meantime, we'll pray that science will find a cure for his disease so that he'll get better. Mom, he sure does deserve it. Don't worry, Mom, I'm 15 years old now, and I know how to take care of myself. I'm sure we'll be back to visit so that you can get to know your grandchildren, your daughter, Judith. P.S. Mom, none of the above is true. I'm over at the neighbor's house. I just wanted to remind you that there are worse things in life than my report card, which is in my desk drawer. I love you. Call me when it's safe to return home. And if you've parented some children over the years, you know, you see these cute little ones running around out here. You think, surely I would never, you know, yeah. We all get thrown some twists and turns along the way. So, but I want to talk about this concept of the blessing over these next 30 or so minutes. And when I first started learning about this, it was both from a standpoint of understanding it principally in a clinical sort of setting, but also, quite frankly, as a parent. And I wanted to understand, what are some things that we can do ahead of time? I mean, you know, none of this is foolproof. None of this is foolproof. I have a friend, Matt, who's a counselor and pastor, and he said, you know, before he had children, he used to give a message called the 10 Commandments of Parenting. After his first daughter, it was the 5 recommendations for parenting. After his second daughter, it was the 2 things you and your wife can, no, after the second daughter, it was 2 suggestions for parenting. And after his third daughter, it was the one thing you and your wife need to do to stay sane during parenting. So, again, these things aren't foolproof, but, you could stack the deck of cards in your way. When we look at Scripture, and we're going to go ahead and start flipping some screens here. Let's see here. I got to get used to seeing how this is going to work. Here we go. The blessing. Okay. So, the blessing itself. So let's see one of the first times that the blessing is introduced in Scripture. And it's in Genesis, all the way back when we see Isaac blessing his son, Jacob. And this is what he says in Genesis 27. Then he said, "My son, bring me some of your game to eat so that I may give you my blessing." Jacob brought it to him, and he ate, and he brought some wine, and he drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, "Come near and kiss me, my son." So he came near and he kissed him. Listen to just a very visceral physicality of this. And Isaac smelled the smell of his garments and blessed him and said, "See, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you." So this is one of the first times, the clearest time early on that we see this concept of giving a blessing. And we want to take the elements from there and say, how does this apply to us? And again, we could see this as Isaac speaking to Jacob, as a father to a son. But this is present if you're a grandparent, if you're a friend. The elements that are present here can permeate all of these, all the relationships that you have. The word blessing literally means to value and attach high honor. And that's what we're talking about. Some ways it'll say that it literally can also mean to bow your knee to show honor, sort of symbolically. But it's to value and attach high honor. And when I look and I see the things that happen that come through my office over the many years, the number of times that just that concept of alone could cut through so many issues of pain and sorrow. And the opposite of this, as it will show up here on the screen, is that to not bless, to curse, literally means to dam up with murky waters. It's like you're going through, you can imagine the image of this with people going through the desert and they're looking for water and they hope this, and they come upon it, but instead of a running stream, it's been dammed up and it's all muddy. And that's what can happen to a person's soul. A person's soul can feel like that it feels, and people work hard at trying to undam this murkiness in their soul. A lot of what counseling is about is doing this, either through harm, abuse, or neglect. And neglect is just as bad. A lot of this today is about understanding the power of what happens with neglect. So as we see, we're going to talk about it in the concept of parenting, but not just there. There was an article written several years ago, and it was on the anniversary of the Holocaust Museum here in town. And one of the primary benefactors of that was a man here in town. His name's goes by William Morgan. In his home country of Poland, as a child, it was Wolf Marguls. And he talked about being in Poland at the time of World War II when the Germans were coming through. And it's a whole article, but I'm just going to cut to this one piece of this article where he says he was going to escape and leave this area where he was with his father. And he says, "My father gave me a blessing before I left," Morgan recalled. "He placed his hand on my head and I could feel his hand shaking. I felt that it was a sign that God himself was listening. I felt tremendous strength. I felt insulated from danger and willing to take chances. I attribute my survival to that blessing. Very interesting that in the Jewish culture, how much that is very understood, but we'll see here later, it's not just in the Jewish culture. And that as we're looking at this and we see that the nature of giving this blessing, understanding the blessing, how it helps us emotionally, it helps us with our perspective of the world, how we see ourselves, how we see God himself, it just has a permeating effect. So what are the 5 elements that go into the blessing? The first one we're going to look at is meaningful touch. As you see in these illustrations we've seen with both Isaac towards Jacob, with this man that I just read about, there's this element of physical touch. When we read, there's a passage in Mark 10:13 through 16. It'll be shown up there. Okay, and these are Jesus' words, or this is about Jesus in the Gospel of Mark. People were bringing little children to Jesus for him to place his hands on them. But the disciples rebuked them. When Jesus saw this, he was indignant. He said to them, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. Truly, I tell you, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it." And verse 16, and he took the children in his arms, he placed his hands on them, and he blessed them. He blessed them. The power of touch in our lives, it just can't be understated. It can't be or overstated. It is, there's so much scientific research that's gone on around physical touch. There's even a touch research institute in Miami. But the Netherlands, there's just a lot of places that are doing research around the power of touch. We've seen how it, from a physical standpoint, those of you who are maybe a little bit of a science nerd, you may know that even physical touch, just touching people, several things happen at that moment when you're touching your children, that your oxytocin, moms know this, we know it's released a lot during nursing, called the hug drug, right? It's a hormone that is released the moment that happens. So when you touch your children, when you touch each other, when as friends, when you put your hand on people, there's dopamine, serotonin, there's all kinds of brain chemicals. These are the chemicals that affect depression, anxiety. There's an increase in these. The dopamine and serotonin go off at a higher level. Not to make this a technical science class, but just to say that, we just see the broad picture of what this looks like in Scripture, but we see that, wow, there is real science to what is going on here. That they've even done studies of basketball teams. Looked at basketball teams. Which basketball teams have the highest touch levels? And it was the teams that have won the most championships, the Boston Celtics and Los Angeles Lakers. They have the highest levels of coming behind each other, touching, high-fiving. Good news for the Rockets is they said, who was the player that touched the most? There's a guy that's coming here to Houston, Kevin Garnett. And he's just, they say he'll shoot a free throw, and within seconds he's touched 5 people. And, it goes off. So there's just so much that's happening with this. They looked at cortisol, when you feel stressed, and another way you could say I feel stressed is to say my cortisol is really high. Well, we've seen that research has shown that as you touch children and adults, that they can actually literally watch how cortisol drops. So, when you're going through your day-to-day activities with each other as husband and wife, don't ignore the power of touch. Studies have shown that husbands and wives need an average of 8 to 10 touches a day to stay at a good spot. Are you touching yourself as a spouse? Get up in the morning. I've been prescribing for years. We call it the 4 transition times. Marriage counselor, a guy that does research and up at University of Minnesota, he calls them the 4 transition times. I found it to be very effective. He says if couples will have a 5-second hug on the 4 transition times a day, when you wake up in the morning, when you part ways, when you come back together at the end of the day and before you go to bed, make sure you have that 5-second hug and you watch what happens, that over 30 days, your marriage, the quality of your marriage, you'll say it's better. I've seen it to be true. Dr. Smalley did a study years ago on fathers and daughters. Well, actually, he wrote an article, but he was quoting this Dr. Mark Hollander, who had been studying women who had had 3 or more unplanned pregnancies. And in doing this, he studied 100 women, and he said that all of them had experienced some type of significant, what we call touch deprivation from their fathers. Touch deprivation. He's a scientist. He's just making observation. He's just reporting data, this guy, Mark Hollander. He wasn't even, he's just saying it's noteworthy that this is true. So what are we doing in our day-to-day? Do we think deliberately about it? And I know a lot of us, I talk to people, again, doing this type of therapy for 39 years, I hear a lot like, we just didn't do that growing up, so it's not my style, it just doesn't come natural. I know that that's got to be sprinkled throughout here. But I'm just telling you that we got to think about how to get over that, how to make it deliberate, how to break some of these generational cycles by doing some of the things we're going to talk about today. Physical touch is the first one. Spoken words is the second one. Every blessing is always spoken. It's spoken over the people around you. And sometimes it's formal, like you see here, like with Isaac towards Jacob, or with the man in the Polish ghetto here. But there are a lot of blessings that can come verbally with just informal messages. My wife and I were on a text stream yesterday with somebody celebrating a birthday, and I watched the text come back up, and we just can't wait to honor and celebrate your birthday. I was just like, well, I'm looking at spoken words on my blessing. I said, you do it routinely. The power of what our words. Do we stop and think deliberately about our words? Are we intentional about our words? Of course, with our children, with our grandchildren, with husband and wife. Are we thinking about our words? We can get very sloppy in our marriage. I watch how sloppy we get in our marriage. We just, I'm just busy. The kids are consuming. And we just don't think about what words we're using. How to drop a quick text in the middle of the day, how to begin thinking about the power of the emotion behind what words we're communicating. Are we communicating value and high honor? Are we communicating these things? We're going to look at a verse here, Proverbs 18:21. Here we go. The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. Now, we could be reading through, like we're reading Proverbs, a chapter a day, and we can get to that and just kind of buzz on by. And we don't stop and think about, what does that really mean? Like, sometimes it's worth taking a verse like that and just extrapolating to what does it look like on the power of our words, the power of life and death. Do we stop and think about that? If you sat in my office, you would. You'd know how important both the harsh words or the neglect of blessing words that bring blessing in life. It's interesting to note that Jesus received words twice from his Father in heaven. If you remember, at the beginning of his ministry, at his baptism, this is my Son in whom I'm well pleased. And if you remember, near the end of his ministry, at the transfiguration, this is my Son in whom who I love and I'm well pleased. The bookends of his ministry, that God the Father, where everything is absolutely perfect, he thinks about these words and he bookends the whole ministry. I'm sure there's other things that we just don't know about, that are not recorded, that are private moments. But it's interesting to me that those are recorded, the bookends of his life at his baptism. This is my Son in who I love and am well pleased. We'll go to the next one, to expressing high value. Children have a way of knowing what we value. I tell people that, when they're thinking about parenting seminars or whatever, to remember most parenting is mostly caught and not taught. Like children are sitting there and they're internally taking notes all day. Okay, this is how dad treats mom, got it. This is how moms treat dads, okay, got it. This is how we think about money, God, sex, time, priorities. They're just, and everything. I mean, how many of men in here are hunters because their dad was a hunter? We will gravitate towards those things that our parents, through just exemplifying, that they will do. And we've seen it time and time again. I'm just so surprised at how much our children have picked up, and the things that were and are important to us, but they witness growing up. Those are the things that they're emulating. And some things I never even said anything about. I'm a runner, run Houston Marathon and some other marathons. Never asked my children. They all ended up running marathons, half marathons. Never once said it. I mean, that's a small thing. But in terms of, God, how, treat each other, think, how our words, how we connect with each other, our children have picked up on that. So all this to say, expressing high value. We look at two verses here, Proverbs 27:19. As water reflects the face, so one's life reflects the heart. Again, that's another one of those verses, like the previous one on anger, to stop and think that our life, our heart reflects what's truly important to us. And then Matthew 6:21, again, we could just blow past it like, oh yeah, that's a familiar one. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. But again, not just in terms of parenting. I want you to keep this net wide, to be thinking about your role in life, the people that you are encountering day in and day out, your coworkers, of course your parents, if you're a grandparent. I want you to just be thinking about that high value. I was talking one time at a church up in Northwest Houston, and this father told me, he was telling a story about the fact that he and his daughter had just had a lot of tension, teenage daughter years, those are tough years. And he said they got to church and they realized it was coming up, and it was rodeo day at church. So everybody was dressed for the event, which was jeans, typical go Western kind of attire. And they got there, and that family hadn't realized it. And, it was mom, dad, son, and the daughter, teenage daughter, 15-ish. And he was like, oh, wow, they could see everybody walking in. And the mom's like, well, I've got a class to teach, and I'm going to miss this one. The little boy's like, I don't care. Takes off, 10-year-old boy. And the girl's like, no way, I'm not going in there. I got to go home and change. And he said he could feel himself like welling up, like, this is not important, leave it. And he just stopped. He pushed it back down. He was like, let's go. It doesn't matter if we're a few minutes late. They rush home. Daughter does what 15-year-old girls do, gets in her attire, gets back home. And I get back up to the church, and he said, crazy enough, that was the day our relationship changed. He said she really, in my language here, she could see what it was that was really important. That his convenience, being late, was subjugated to that she was valuable. This was important to her, and if it's important to her, it was important to him. And he seized the moment, and he rose to the occasion. And this was like 2 years later, he was telling me that it had happened 2 years, and he said, our relationship from then on, he said, before then I'd go to give her a hug, like, push back, and just her voice and her everything about her just said, I want my distance. And he said that moment, that day, everything changed. And he said, somehow I knew at that moment that I needed to do something different than what came natural. He said, what came natural was, I don't care. And he said he realized that he was so glad he rose above it. The fourth element is picturing a special future. You can especially see that with that passage in Isaac speaking to Jacob, or the man in the Polish ghetto. But this is a little more not as tangible, but the importance of it is, seizing our children's dreams, seizing and having them talk about it, doing what we can to come alongside of those things, really speaking and making, if that is valuable, important to them, whatever that is, that we do come alongside. We do what we can. There's a law in physics: water can't rise above its source, and that the source of what it is that we think is so important, in picturing a special future, children have a hard time even rising above this if we are not able to speak in a language that talks about what we think of them, what we think that they're capable of, thinking in terms of speaking great things. And so oftentimes I watch how parents are so afraid, especially people who were raised in more rough and tumble homes, like myself, honestly, raised on the East Coast and just, didn't receive any of this, or I don't know, smatterings maybe here and there. But, and I find that dads especially, but moms too, they can be afraid, like, I'm going to give him a big head and I want him to be tough. And so I'm going to withhold some of these things to make him tougher. And I say him because oftentimes it comes out in boys here. And how oftentimes this is not interpreted as I became tougher, but how oftentimes it becomes more like I'm just not worthy. I'm just not that important. And children just don't think about shooting for the stars on things. There's a little article I read a couple years ago, and some of you may be familiar with some of the characters in here. This is a true story, and it's called The Unbelievable Power of an Investment. And it says, her name was Queen. She was noted for being the mother of 8 children and a large amount of determination. Queen had determined her youngest, named Simon, was going to get an education. That was a very auspicious goal because Queen's husband, as a former slave and part-time sharecropper, did not have the money to educate children. Besides that, in Savannah, Tennessee, where Simon was born, a boy was considered, quote, wasted if he stayed in school after he was big enough to do farm work. But Queen was determined. She began to persuade her husband, Alec, to educate Simon by appealing to his ego. Quote, wouldn't it be prestigious if we deliberately wasted one and got him educated? Sounds funny for our ears, doesn't it? And so after much persuasion, Alec allowed Simon to finish the 8th grade rather than stopping at the 6th grade. Then it was high school, and finally Simon went to college. Because he was working as a waiter and a handyman as much as possible, maintaining his studies in college was difficult. When it was winter, he would arise at 4 a.m. to light fires in the more prosperous homes so they could awake in comfort. The schedule was so demanding that at the end of his 2nd year, Simon was called into the dean's office to inform him that he had failed a class. The news was so discouraging that Simon began to consider jettisoning his goal as a college education and returning home to become a sharecropper like his dad. However, a few days later, he was again called into the office to be informed that he had been chosen from the hundreds of applicants to be one of 24 college students selected for summertime sleeping car porters. Simon was ecstatic. All summer long, he saved every tip. He was very seriously considering returning home to sharecrop. If he decided on that route, he would need a mule and a plow, and that would cost him about $40. One morning at 2 a.m., the buzzer sounded quickly, and he arose and slipped on his uniform, went to the passenger berths to see what his passenger needed. It was an older man and his wife who had had trouble sleeping. They thought some milk might help, so Simon returned with warm milk on a silver tray as quick as possible. The sleepless traveler began to question the porter about his background and current situation. Simon explained that he was from Savannah, that he was currently attending AT College in Greensboro. The traveler listened intently and finally returned to his berth to find asleep. That fall, Simon decided to utilize his precious $40 of investment capital to purchase one more semester in school. He had barely arrived on campus when he was called into the president's office. The president asked him if he had served as a porter that summer. Had he served a man and his wife warm milk at 2 a.m.? Yes. Well, Simon, that gentleman, was R.S.M. Boyce, a retired executive with Curtis Publishing of the Saturday Evening Post. He donated $500 to pay for your tuition, books, and board for the entire year. Instead of returning to sharecropping, Simon returned to college. The scholarship enabled him to apply himself fully, and he graduated first in his class. That achievement obtained for him a full scholarship at Cornell, where he completed graduate studies and a master's, while his new wife enrolled at Ithaca Conservatory of Music to study music and to raise her 4 children. One of his children, Alex, some 40 years later, was sitting at the plush offices of the Saturday Evening Post in New York City, discussing with the post officers the details of the contract they were about to sign. Suddenly, Alex began to reflect on his brothers and his sister. His brother George was the chairman of the U.S. Postal Rate Commission, Julius was an architect, Lois was a music teacher, and Alex was a writer. He thought of his father and the provision he had made for them, all because RMS Boyce had made an investment at a very critical point in his life. And this young porter, his name was Simon Haley. And now, some 40 years later, Alex Haley was contracting the condensation of his book Roots with the Saturday Evening Post as he sat at the office of the Curtis Publishing Company, and he began to cry. He was overwhelmed as he realized his wife and his opportunity to write were really the result of a gift of a man he had never met. So we look and we see that sometimes the high value, it doesn't just come through family. Sometimes it comes through unsuspecting people. We have that power all around us. You have little children, you have their friends coming around your house. Are we thinking about those words and what it is that can lift up one of these little guys around that are coming around and picturing this special future? Last element of this is active commitment, which is really time and unconditional love. Active commitment is a true time commitment, and it's also unconditional. It's something that somebody does for us. There was a study done on compassion and sympathy, empathy amongst children, and it was looked to see what was it that contributed the most to children receiving or developing an inherent sense of sympathy and compassion, empathy for people. And they found that basically the most prominent factor that went on was fathers who spent at least 2 evenings a week having some deliberate time, bathing their children, feeding their children, just some kind of engagement with their children, something very purposeful. It becomes tricky as children get older, but this active commitment. When I was in, not graduate school, undergrad school, I had a tuition that was routinely due. I was paying for my own tuition, no help from home or whatever, so between scholarships and everything. And I always had $500 and some change every trimester for where I went at HBU at the time, where John, your pastor, went. Now known as HCU. And I would routinely have to come up with this $500, $530-something, 3 times a year. And it was always a challenge. I was always paying this off, waiting tables, going in, paying 20, 30, 50 bucks here and there. And it was a crazy experience to do. Looking back, I'm like, I have no idea how God did this. But one semester, it was really bad. They were doing some construction over on the Katy Freeway where I was working, and I just had not paid any of that. I had no resources. There was no plan B. There was no, and I just told my roommate, I'm like, yeah, you'll probably see me more this next semester or something. I'm going to stop this coming semester and get a second job, and because I just did not have any of that paid off, and I could never move forward. They were very clear. Couldn't go forward with the next semester. And so I'm waiting tables and I'm waiting tables on this pastor that I knew. He and his wife would come in, and every once in a while, every quarter or something, they happened to come in this night. And I had already prayed, like, God, I guess this is your, my prayer, I'd like to say, was some kind of ardent prayer of, God, you've got to, it was just like, I guess this is your way of saying I'm not to go to school next semester. So anyway, this pastor, he comes in with his wife, and he asked how things were going. And of course, I'm not going to say anything of how desperate things really are. I just say, oh, it's going fine, this and that. And somehow in the course of the evening, he and his wife are eating, and I'm bringing something to them, filling up glasses, and he reaches over and shoves this to me, and I said, sort of, what's this? And he said, Jamie and I just felt compelled to give you this. And I pick it up, and it's this check for $500 for tuition. And, when I think about active commitment, this is active commitment to me. Yes, it's commitment, time commitment, but it's him engaging and being committed into my future. And he said, we believe in you. We believe that you're going to do some great things here. And I mean, I didn't even say thank you. I turned around and went in the bathroom, and I just sat there, and I just burst out in tears. And I thought, wow, God, you're amazing that you would do this. And so I went back, told them a little of the story. I actually don't quite even remember. This is 1984 or something, beyond what I have told you. But that story really happened just like that. And I think about the number of people in my life that have done these, that have displayed these things. I'll close with this one last story. There's a guy, some of you may remember, Bill Glass. He's a former NFL player, and he was Pro Bowl for 4 times. And he ended up, after he retired, he developed Bill Glass Prison Ministry. And I read this article. It was an interview with him, and he talks about, what was your relationship with your father like, the interviewer says. He says, my earliest recollections are that my father would sit down at the bedside, and he'd rub my back and tell me what a fine boy I was, and almost every night he would kiss me. He was a pro baseball player and a very manly man, but he had no problem expressing his love and blessing to me and to my brother and sister. My father died when I was only 14 years old, and he had been sick for about 2 years before he died. I had a huge hole in my heart. I felt despairing. My mother was very loving and warm, but it just wasn't the same as when my dad was there. My coach was told, power of coaches, by the way, was told that I had lost my father and that it really hit me hard. So every day after workout, he'd stay out there with me. He'd teach me how to play football. He would walk with me after workout to the dressing room with his arm around me. He'd ask me to sit beside him on the bus going to the game and just talk to me. Then at noon, he'd meet with me. We'd lift weights for an hour. I moved from being the smallest and slowest player on the team to within a year of being unblockable because I had learned good fundamentals. And I didn't even like football then. The only reason I played was because I wanted my father's blessing. A kid who is searching desperately for a blessing will put himself in all sorts of contortions in life to get it. You see this in gangs. Kids get into gangs because they want to be accepted by a family. Most kids that get into gangs have no other relationships. So as a result, they go into the gang because the gang promises them that they're going to be a part of a family. I've got your back, and I'm going to watch you all the way. And I'm with you no matter what. So he understood the power of that blessing. So as we look at these 5 elements behind me, there we go. Meaningful touch, as we said. We need to feel that we're loved. Spoken message, we need to hear that we're valuable. Attaching high value, we need to know that we're valuable to someone else. Picturing a special future, we need to see that we have a special future. And the 5th one is active commitment. That is, we know it's coming. So, thank you for this morning. And I'm going to close this in a prayer, and then we'll go from there.